Pick up a tennis ball, and the first thing you notice isn't its color, its weight, or its bounce. It's the texture. That soft, fuzzy coating that covers the entire surface. The one that feels almost like felt against your fingertips. It's so familiar, so associated with the sport, that it's hard to imagine a tennis ball without it. But if you think about it for even a moment, it seems like a strange design choice. Most sports balls are smooth. Soccer balls, basketballs, bowling balls, billiard balls. They all have sleek, polished, or textured surfaces designed for grip or control. Yet the tennis ball is covered in a layer of soft, fibrous fuzz that looks like it belongs on a stuffed animal rather than a piece of high-performance sports equipment. So why is it there? Is it decorative, traditional? Or does that fuzzy coating actually do something critical that would change the entire game if it were removed? The answer, as it turns out, is deeply rooted in physics, aerodynamics, material science, and over a century of sporting evolution. That thin layer of fuzz is one of the most carefully engineered features in all of sports, and without it, tennis as we know it simply wouldn't work. To understand why tennis balls are fuzzy, we first need to understand what happens to a ball when it flies through the air at high speed. When a professional tennis player serves, the ball can leave the racket at speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. At those velocities, the interaction between the ball's surface and the surrounding air becomes critically important. As the ball moves, it pushes through air molecules, creating a thin layer of airflow that wraps around its surface. This is known as the boundary layer, and how it behaves determines everything about the ball's flight, its speed, its stability, its trajectory, and how quickly it slows down. On a perfectly smooth ball, this boundary layer separates from the surface relatively early, creating a large wake of turbulent, low-pressure air behind the ball. This large wake acts like a parachute, pulling the ball backward and creating significant aerodynamic drag. The result is a ball that decelerates quickly and behaves unpredictably in the air. Now here's where the fuzz changes everything. The fuzzy surface of a tennis ball is made up of thousands of tiny fibers that create a microscopically rough texture across the entire sphere. When the ball moves through the air, these fibers interact with the boundary layer in a very specific and beneficial way. Instead of allowing the airflow to separate from the surface early, the fuzz energizes the boundary layer, encouraging it to stay attached to the ball's surface for longer. This delayed separation results in a smaller, more compact wake behind the ball, which means significantly less drag. The ball still slows down, of course, air resistance is unavoidable, but it slows down in a controlled, predictable manner. This gives players the ability to hit powerful shots that still behave consistently, traveling through the air with a trajectory that can be anticipated and responded to. Without the fuzz, the ball would be at the mercy of chaotic aerodynamic forces, making the sport less about skill and more about luck. But aerodynamics is only part of the story. The fuzz also plays a crucial role in one of the most important and exciting aspects of tennis: spin. When a player strikes the ball with a brushing motion across the racket strings, they impart topspin, backspin, or side spin to the ball. This spin is what allows players to curve shots, dip the ball sharply over the net, or make it kick unexpectedly after bouncing. The fuzzy surface is essential for generating and maintaining this spin. When the ball contacts the racket strings, the fibers on the ball's surface grip the strings momentarily, increasing the friction between the two surfaces. This enhanced friction allows the strings to catch the ball and rotate it more effectively than they could if the surface was smooth. A smooth ball would slide off the strings with minimal spin, producing flat, predictable shots that lack the variety and tactical depth that make tennis so compelling to play and watch. The fuzz essentially gives players a tool to manipulate the ball's rotation, and with it, the ability to create shots that bend the rules of simple straight-line physics. Spin doesn't just affect what happens in the air, it also transforms what happens when the ball hits the court. A tennis ball with heavy topspin will dive downward sharply as it approaches the opponent, then kick up high after bouncing, pushing the receiver back and forcing them to adjust their positioning. A ball with backspin, often called slice, will stay low after bouncing, skidding through the court surface and forcing the opponent to bend down and reach for a difficult return. These variations in bounce behavior are fundamental to the strategy of modern tennis. The fuzz on the ball is directly responsible for how effectively spin translates into movement both in the air and off the ground. When the fuzzy surface meets the court, the fibers grip the playing surface, amplifying the effect of the spin and making the bounce more dramatic and more responsive to the player's intent. Without that layer of fuzz, the ball would bounce in a more uniform and less interesting way, flattening out the tactical variety that separates good players from great ones. The fuzzy covering also has a significant impact on the speed of the game, and this is something that has been carefully calibrated over decades of development. Tennis is played on different surfaces, hard courts, clay courts, and grass courts, and the interaction between the ball's fuzz and these surfaces varies in ways that define the character of each playing style. On clay courts, the tiny fibers pick up particles of the loose surface material, which slightly increases the ball's diameter and weight over time, slowing it down and creating longer rallies. On grass courts, the fuzz interacts with the slick, low-friction surface to produce faster, lower bounces that reward aggressive serve and volley play. On hard courts, the interaction falls somewhere in between, offering a balance of speed and bounce that tests all-around ability. The fuzz, in other words, isn't just a feature of the ball. It's an active participant in defining how the sport is played on every surface, and changing it would fundamentally alter the balance and diversity of the game. Now let's talk about what the fuzz is actually made of. The covering on a modern tennis ball is typically composed of a blend of wool and synthetic fibers, most commonly nylon. This blend is woven into a durable felt fabric that is cut into a distinctive dumbbell shape, two identical pieces that are glued and stitched onto the rubber core of the ball. The choice of materials is not arbitrary. Wool provides softness, natural resilience, and excellent moisture-absorbing properties, while nylon adds strength, durability, and resistance to abrasion. The weave density, fiber length, and overall thickness of the felt are all precisely controlled by manufacturers to meet the specifications set by the International Tennis Federation. Even small variations in the fuzz can change how the ball plays, which is why professional tournaments use balls from approved manufacturers that have been tested to behave within strict aerodynamic and mechanical parameters. The fuzz you feel when you pick up a tennis ball is the product of meticulous material engineering, not a random design choice. The history of tennis ball construction also sheds light on why the fuzzy surface became standard. In the earliest forms of the sport, which date back to 12th century France, balls were made from leather stuffed with wool, hair, or cork. These early balls had rough, irregular surfaces that naturally influenced their flight and bounce. As the game evolved into lawn tennis in the 19th century, rubber became the core material of choice, offering better bounce and consistency. But plain rubber balls were too fast, too smooth, and too difficult to control on grass courts. Players and manufacturers quickly discovered that wrapping the rubber core in a layer of flannel or felt dramatically improved playability. The covering slowed the ball down to a manageable speed, gave it better grip on the racket and the court, and made its flight through the air more stable and predictable. Over time, this felt covering was refined, standardized, and optimized, but the fundamental principle remained the same. The fuzz was never decoration. From the very beginning, it was the solution to a set of physical problems that made the game playable. There's another practical benefit of the fuzz that casual players appreciate even if they don't realize it: sound. The distinctive pop of a tennis ball being struck by a racket is partially created by the interaction between the fuzzy surface and the strings. A smooth rubber ball would produce a sharper, harsher, and less satisfying sound on impact. The felt dampens the contact slightly, producing the clean, resonant thud that players and spectators associate with a well-hit shot. This might seem trivial, but sound is a surprisingly important part of the sport's experience. Players use the sound of the ball hitting the racket to gauge the quality of their shots, and spectators in the stands or watching on television rely on it as part of the sensory experience that makes tennis engaging. The fuzz contributes to this auditory signature in a way that would be noticeably absent if it were removed. It's also worth mentioning what happens to the fuzz during the course of a match. If you've ever watched professional tennis closely, you've noticed that players are given new balls at regular intervals, typically every 7 to 9 games. This isn't just a formality. As the match progresses, the fuzz on the ball gradually wears down. The fibers flatten, fray, and sometimes detach entirely, changing the aerodynamic and frictional properties of the ball. A new, freshly opened tennis ball with fluffy, intact fuzz behaves differently than one that has been hammered back and forth for several games. The worn ball is slightly faster through the air because the degraded fuzz produces less drag, and it grips the court and the racket strings less effectively, reducing spin potential. Players are acutely aware of these differences and often adjust their strategy depending on whether they're playing with new or used balls. Some players prefer the extra grip and control of fresh balls, while others favor the speed of worn ones. This gradual degradation of the fuzz is a dynamic element of the game that adds yet another layer of tactical complexity. And there's one more thing about the fuzz that connects to something we all associate with tennis balls, but rarely question: the color. That bright, almost electric yellow-green hue isn't painted onto the rubber. It's dyed into the felt fibers themselves. Before 1972, tennis balls were traditionally white. But when tennis began to be broadcast widely on color television, viewers had difficulty tracking the white ball against the light-colored court surfaces and backgrounds. The International Tennis Federation approved the switch to optic yellow, a color scientifically chosen for maximum visibility on television screens and to the human eye under various lighting conditions. The fuzz, in this case, served as the canvas for this visibility upgrade. The fibrous texture of the felt holds the dye effectively and diffuses light in a way that makes the ball easier to see from a distance, both for players on the court and audiences watching from home. Even the ball's iconic color is inseparable from its fuzzy surface. So the next time you hold a tennis ball, run your thumb across that soft, fibrous surface and consider everything it's doing. It's managing the aerodynamics of a ball traveling at extreme speeds, ensuring that its flight is stable and its deceleration is predictable. It's gripping the racket strings to enable the spins and curves that define modern tennis strategy. It's interacting with the court surface to produce the bounces and kicks that vary from clay to grass to hard court. It's absorbing the impact of each hit to produce the distinctive sound that players and fans instinctively recognize. It's holding the bright yellow-green dye that makes the ball visible on screens and across stadiums. And it's slowly wearing down over the course of a match, subtly shifting the dynamics of play in ways that only the most attentive players and coaches fully appreciate. All of that, packed into a thin layer of wool and nylon, felt wrapped around a hollow rubber core. That fuzz isn't a quirky tradition or a cosmetic afterthought. It is, in many ways, the single most important feature of the tennis ball, the invisible hand that shapes every serve, every rally, and every point in the game. It's a quiet masterpiece of functional design, hiding in plain sight on one of the most recognizable objects in the world of sport. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution.